Yes. Shalom, Rosh, Tiferet, Habarim. And greetings and welcome, guests, friends, and visitors. It is the time to share the good things that have been revealed in order to make everything better. Because there are certain times when there is a certain form and there are certain forms of divine support that are highly important to attain and have the ability to access and utilize to secure your complete and total operation and life and health and wealth, and in order to guarantee the good existence for yourself and for others in your life. Now, basically, this is very simply accomplished, and it's always possible to accomplish by practically applying wisdom in our life. And more specifically, my friends, if you practically apply wisdom as you go, as much as possible, what happens is everything works miraculously. It actually works miraculously so that when you're looking at it, you realize, wait, that worked very good, better than I expected, because of, and mostly because of, always maintaining a certain amount of mastery and skillful, wise, prudent living, okay? So, at the most basic level, what I'm talking about is monitoring the cycles of life that you're in, mapping these life cycles out, and that usually will happen in the form of a self-mastery calendar, or simply a calendar, preferably a good one, a big one that's as big as letter size, legal size paper, right? A big one, the size of a book, with a page for every day. Where now, on and in this calendar, we have the life cycles mapped out as accurately as possible, even for every day, including certain life cycles that are very important as to what actually can be made happen by us, and so that we can have an overview of the resources available that we have, wherewith we are actually able to accomplish certain things at certain times in certain windows of opportunity. And these windows of opportunity, these are different life cycles that go on, and some of them happen every day. And more specifically, there are certain windows of opportunity on certain days, especially and very, very closely defined and related to the lunar units and the combination of the short lunar units and the long lunar units that exist during every day, and in particular short lunar units that go on every day. They are generally identifiable as the 12-hour cycle of the tides. And so what happens is every day, basically, sometimes it's past 12 a.m. or before. It's usually, generally, there are 2 high tides a day and 2 low tides a day. Now, along with that, there is basically 2 high tides a day and 2 low tides a day. Generally within 24 hours. Sometimes though, like I said, it'll be the case that one of them is perhaps before 12 a.m. or after 12 a.m. and so you have 3 a day because things are moved over, or things are moving a little bit. But generally though, there's 2 high tides a day and 2 low tides a day. Now, these have to be identified because the polarity of what goes on in life and in earth, human, and life activity in the world around us, the perfectly systematically operational mechanism that basically determines positive or negative results, yes and no, increase, decrease, plus, minus. Generally, everything that could be classified as either positive or neutral or negative happening in life, and so on. This complete and total thing is actually the combination of the short lunar units and the short lunar units of, shall we say, the tides, whereof there's 2 high tides a day and 2 low ones a day generally, and also the 3.5 day long lunar unit that alternates between negative and positive. Now, for this moment, just get a basic overview of this. There's basically 2 different life cycles that go on all the time. It's the short lunar unit and the long lunar unit, basically. So the short lunar unit of the tides and the sections within that of 3 hours. I'll explain a little more detail in a second. And then there's the 3.5 day long lunar unit that alternates between negative and positive. And these 2 things, they overlap at all times. And so there's always a certain lunar unit that one is in that's a combination of the short lunar unit of the tides and the long 3.5 day lunar unit that one is in. I'm going to explain a little more detailedly now because it does have to be comprehended. So every day, approximately twice a day, there's a high tide and so every day there's 2 high tides and there's 2 low tides. Sometimes it's before 12 a.m. or afterwards, so then you have like 2 high a day and 1 low a day, and the next low one is like a little bit into the next day, but generally 2 high tides a day, 2 low tides a day. There's a 12-hour tide cycle. Okay, so as a general rule, let's start with let's start with the point that makes the most sense. Basically, all right, where should I start from? Neutral? So when the tide is emptied out and it's low, it's reached a point of being low. Hold on a second. 3 hours after it's been emptied out, So 3 hours after a low tide, it's a It's actually, we're looking at the point of low tide, right? So now for 3 hours, it rises, and that's a negative unit of 3 hours, a negative short lunar unit of 3 hours. And then 3 hours before a high tide, it's a positive short lunar unit. And then after the high tide again, it's a negative 3 hour lunar unit. And then after that, it's a positive 3 hour lunar unit till a low tide again. And then from a low tide, after a low tide, it's a 3 hour positive, 3 hour negative lunar unit. And then 3 hours before the next high tide, it's a positive short lunar unit. Now, what happens is that this goes on all the time. Every 3 hours, based on where you are and where the nearest maritime port is, your tide cycle, it changes. You have two. So basically every 3 hours, one of the life cycles that's the most important to monitor changes. It's the short lunar unit, either either negative or positive. Now, the next one, so basically that's going on, right? There's one you got to monitor all the time. It's every 3 hours it changes. Okay, while this is going on, there's one that's 3.5 days in length, and that's the long lunar unit of 3.5 days. This one changes every 3.5 days. And how is it identified? It's identified by taking the exact time, date, hour, minute of the new moon or the full moon, based on the place where you operate. Wherever the nearest city or point of reference is where you can get an accurate date and time for the new moon or the full moon. And as a general rule, and generally speaking, 3 days after a new moon, it's a negative long lunar unit. 3 days, So 3 days after a new moon, it's a negative long lunar unit. Then, for another 3.5 days, there's a positive long lunar unit. And then there's a negative 3.5 day. And then there's a positive and a negative. Till finally, basically speaking, 3.5 days before a full moon, it's a positive long lunar unit again. And then 3.5 days after a full moon, it's a negative 3.5 day long lunar unit. So this goes on all the time. One of the biggest keys to being able to attain and actually get positive results or answers or support or whatever accomplishment of whatever objectives you have positively achieved, it actually has everything to do with the combination of the long and the short lunar unit that you're in, and that you coordinate your activities and whatever you're working on or seeking to accomplish. As with all things in life, coordinate everything into the right windows of opportunity when divine providence is readily giving certain forms of divine providence at certain times, so you have the resources to accomplish whatever it is you're working on. I'm going to simplify this in that it's like a person who's standing at the beach, would like to go out on the ocean safely to go fishing. So this person launches his or her vessel or boat when the tide is going out and gets carried out safely. And then when the tide heads to land again, he then goes inland again from the ocean and gets carried to land safely again. So it's like utilizing the available energy and providence that's there, whereby and how through the universe works systematically, how life is cyclical. Now, if you can properly identify the life cycles you're in and monitor them and pay attention to them every day, what happens is it's as if you have a map or even like a menu or an inventory of what is actually technically and divinely possible to a certain degree, to a very sufficient degree actually. When I say divinely possible, it's to a certain degree that we can see and know, okay, this thing here, I can set this objective within this time frame, and it will be accomplished then, because the support in order to accomplish this, that will lead to the cooperation of other human beings or whatever it is available at this time. We can see the polarity that goes on at that time. There's a 3-hour window of opportunity, right? What is the ideal window of opportunity? For whatever thing, there's a particular set of life cycles for the thing to be accomplished that automatically leads to a positive result, usually even better than the objective that one has set. For example, at the nearest maritime port, it's a high tide at 6 p.m. Okay, we're running a scenario now, an ideal scenario. So currently, I have an objective. At the nearest maritime port, there's a high tide at 6 p.m. 3 hours before a high tide, it's a positive short lunar unit. There's a energetically masculine, life-giving, positively increasing, and mass gaining, like a maximizing, amplifying energetic state that goes on for those 3 hours in the form of a positive short lunar unit of 3 hours from 3 to 6 p.m. Because at 6 p.m. it's a high tide, and 3 hours before a high tide it's a positive short lunar unit. Okay, so there's positive energy available there, basically speaking, okay? Then it happens to be a 3.5 day positive long lunar unit also. So a positive 3.5 day long lunar unit is also, it's a time frame of 3.5 days where there's positive, energetically masculine, life-giving, mass-gaining, maximizing, amplifying energy available. That's it's basically the state that the energy that powers the universe, and it goes through a systematic, cyclical system here in this heavens and earth plane, earth human life activity world that we live in, goes through a positive state there, where there's now a combination, where there's a combination of positive short lunar unit for 3 hours and a positive long lunar unit for 3.5 days. That gives you a 3-hour window of opportunity where there's a massive amount of positive energy, so to say, available for you to operate and accomplish things in life, earth, human, and life activity. This works. So now the key is to have an accurate map and to monitor the life cycles that you're in and that are going on and the ones that are coming accurately. Because if you do this, like I said, it's like having a map and a menu and an inventory of what divinely provided resources are available at certain times, in the form of being able to be comprehended as basically either negative, neutral, or positive polarity existing, for example, for 3-hour time frames. At that point, we know, okay, look, within these 3 hours, I can accomplish a lot, because there's a lot of positive, life-giving force and support and drive universally available at that time. I've done this before. It works. Now, this is what makes such a big difference between success or failure, or yes or no, or increase or decrease, or winning, or etc., etc. You get the picture? It's all very closely related to the lunar units, and how the combination of the 3.5 day long lunar unit and the 3.5 day long lunar unit and the 3 hour, actually, let's say the short lunar unit of the tides, that's actually a 12-hour one, yet it's divided into half and then into half again to get the exact details. I just explained it all though. So basically then with a self-mastery calendar, you have an overview of these times and these units and these life cycles. And so then it's just, like I said, it's like you have a menu or an inventory of the divinely provided resources, generally speaking, and certainly though, for certain times. And this can be all the time. You can actually have an overview of what's possible basically at all times to a certain degree, and to a degree that is very much enough to be able to live healthily and wealthily and permanently, increasingly prosperous forever, actually. So that's already good enough. It's actually how it is. Now, usually, and this is actually what happens, is things work out a little bit better than you aim for certain things, for objectives, you accomplish them, and things work even better yet. That's because it's because of divine support that's also at work, and divine providence, additional, like plus perfect guidance that goes on. It also, there's a certain amount of navigating that you have to do successfully, and if you do it, it really works good, and it makes things very, very good.